This video is for familiarization only and is designed to assist in pre-emergency planning for incidents involving our nation's railroads. The information presented in this video can assist your agency in developing safe and effective protocols and incident response procedures. This video and the information contained herein is not intended to take the place of actual training, replace basic safety rules, departmental guidelines, or established regional response protocols. This video is part 2 in an informational series for law enforcement personnel. Part 1 of this series, titled Rail Safety for Law Enforcement, covers railroad basics and provides a more in-depth coverage of railroad safety. Additional informational videos of interest can be found on the FRA website, or a copy can be obtained by contacting Michael Griskavich at this email address.
There are thousands of miles of railroad track across this nation that support both passenger and rail freight movement across the country. Trains intersect with the many thoroughfares and highways within our communities. This convergence of trains with pedestrians and vehicular traffic can often have disastrous results. Regrettably, about every 3 hours, a person or vehicle is struck by a train. These incidents may result in a fatality or critical injury, as well as extensive damage to the train, its tracks, vehicles, surrounding property, and the community. With such a high frequency of occurrence, the possibility of responding to an incident involving a train at some point in your career is highly likely. As law enforcement officers, you have the necessary training to investigate vehicular and pedestrian crashes. This presentation provides information related to vehicular and pedestrian collisions in a railroad environment, with a focus on rail grade crossing incidents. The railroad environment presents some unique safety issues that may be unfamiliar to you. Every effort is made to identify these unique safety issues you may encounter while investigating a rail incident, or if you find yourself on railroad property in the line of duty. This presentation is designed to offer investigative skills and also provide crossing safety and incident prevention strategies.
911, what's the address of the emergency? County Dispatch and Fire and Rescue need to respond to Church Road at the railroad crossing intersection.
Are you prepared to respond to an accident at a grade crossing? What information is needed and what steps should be taken to investigate a grade crossing collision? Most railroad incidents involving motorists and pedestrians are avoidable. The severity of motorist injury in vehicle-train collisions is significant. A motorist is many times more likely to die in a collision involving a train than in a collision involving another vehicle. Locomotives can weigh between approximately 150,000 to 450,000 pounds. A loaded freight train could weigh in excess of 12 million pounds. Imagine what happens to a soda can run over by a car. The weight ratio between a typical 3,000-pound car and a 12-ounce can of soda is 4,000 to 1. By comparison, the weight ratio between a modest 12 million pound freight train and that same 3,000-pound car is also 4,000 to 1. A train hitting a car is comparable to a car running over a can of soda. The sheer mass of a train makes it impossible for it to stop quickly. If a train is traveling at 55 miles per hour, it may take a mile or more for the train to come to a complete stop. This is approximately equivalent to the length of 18 football fields. Keep in mind that a train crew may not be able to stop a train quickly enough to avoid a collision. In addition to motor vehicle collisions, a high number of pedestrians die while trespassing on railroad property. Not only is trespassing on railroad property against the law, but trespassers often put their lives at risk, not realizing the dangerous nature of this illegal act. Due to their size, weight, and inability to stop quickly, trains have the right of way even over first responders, motorists, and pedestrians. Anytime you are within the working area of a set of railroad tracks, you're in the railroad's right of way. The right of way includes both the railroad track and its surrounding area. Typically, the right of way extends 25 feet from the center line of each set of tracks, but may vary. A cardinal rule to remember is trains can move in either direction on any track at any time. The train body width can extend 3 feet or more beyond the steel rails. Today's trains are quieter than ever and may seem farther away and moving slower than they actually are. Have you ever watched an airplane land? Did the airplane appear to be suspended in the air or moving at a very slow speed? The reality is the airplane is probably traveling around 150 miles per hour at the approach for landing. This perception is very similar to that of a moving train. By failing to obey laws put in place for public safety, motorists and trespassers increase their chance of being critically injured or killed. These incidents often result in needless death, injury, or property damage, impacting communities and railroad personnel. When you receive a call regarding a railroad incident, what is your next course of action? There are unique factors to consider when dealing with a railroad incident, such as access to the scene may be limited or blocked. The collision scene may encompass a large area. Knowledge of rail equipment and railroad operations. Possible hazardous materials involvement. Presence of hazardous material within the train does not necessarily present a hazard unless a release has occurred. Possibility of a train derailment.
911, what's the address of your emergency?
Railroad incidents will require the coordination between the railroad and your dispatcher. Your access to the scene may be limited or blocked. The collision scene may encompass a large area with the potential for mass casualties, and there is a possibility that the train has derailed. It is important to remember that no one, not even emergency responders, are immune to dangers presented at grade crossings. Don't become complacent while working in a railroad environment, and always be alert for approaching trains or other on-track vehicles. When responding to the scene of a collision or another emergency, you may become focused on the call and not the potential hazards included in the railroad environment.
When I receive a call involving a railroad emergency, I start asking myself several questions. Is a passenger train or freight train involved? Is a motor vehicle or pedestrian involved? Where is the motor vehicle located? Is the train crew or other railroad employees injured, and where are they located? Is the grade crossing blocked by the train or accident scene? Are hazardous materials involved? Where is the train located? And who do I call to shut down the rail traffic?
Getting as much information as possible prior to arriving at the scene is essential. Remember, upon arrival at a railroad incident, your safety and the safety of others comes first. Ensure the appropriate railroads have been contacted and all train traffic has been stopped before fouling the track. Fouling a track essentially means being in such proximity to a track that an individual could be struck by a moving train or other on-track equipment. You should consider yourself in the foul anytime you are within 4 feet of the closest rail. At the scene, you may need to provide the location of the grade crossing to notify the responsible railroad to shut down rail traffic or to assist other emergency responders in identifying the location.
Look for a blue and white emergency notification sign. The sign should be posted near the crossing and be clearly visible. The emergency notification sign includes the railroad's emergency contact number and the US DOT identification number. The railroad name and corresponding railroad milepost may also be listed, although this is optional. including both the US DOT number and the railroad milepost, will provide the railroad with the exact location of the grade crossing. This is vital when requesting that all train traffic be stopped.
You may encounter older versions of the emergency notification sign that may be slightly different in color and appearance. These older signs still contain the required emergency notification information necessary for reporting. Even though your dispatcher has contacted the railroad to stop train traffic at the scene, including the potential traffic on adjacent tracks, you still need to remain alert. Just like crossing the street, look both ways before approaching and crossing the tracks. Avoid walking between the rails and don't step or stand on any rail. Remember, avoid fouling the track unless safe to do so. Even in situations that do not directly involve a train, but still occur on railroad property, you should always contact the railroad. The railroads can help protect you and the scene by controlling train traffic and ensuring railroad personnel are notified of your presence.
Upon arrival at the scene, our primary concern is scene safety. We want to aid those who are injured and make sure the scene is secure to prevent secondary crashes. The first step we take is contacting the railroad, making sure that they're aware of the incident on the tracks to prevent further trains from coming down and getting those assets that we need on scene to help us with our investigation. Obviously, the person in the motor vehicle is going to be the most injured, so that would be our primary concern, but we'd want to render aid to anyone who may be injured on the train. There could be even witnesses, bystanders that are injured because of the impact. So after ensuring that all the injured are attended to, we then turn our primary focus onto the train itself. We would obviously shut down the roadway. We would contact the Department of Transportation so they know that they have a road closure, and also to assist us in rerouting traffic if that's going to be necessary in the future, depending on how long the roadway may be shut down. Or with a train, they don't stop immediately on scene. It could be stopped a mile down the road, and it could be blocking another crossing that we're not aware of. So a second road may be tied up as a result of the train being stopped. From there, our investigation goes into what happened to cause this crash. Was it the vehicle? Was it the train? Or was it the crossing signal itself not giving it enough advance warning to either one that the train was approaching? So after ensuring that there's no one else injured, after securing the scene, our primary focus goes to what caused this crash.
Some of the major causes of rail collisions are racing the train to the crossing, impatience, misjudgment of train speed and distance from the crossing, impairment due to alcohol, drugs, fatigue, or any combination thereof, stopping on the railroad tracks, failure to look in both directions approaching the crossing, driver distractions. Due to your expertise, you know how to properly investigate an incident. This informational video is the second in a series that covers the unique aspects of the railroad that are pertinent to your investigation. The first video, Rail Safety for Law Enforcement, also covers more of this information and can be viewed on the FRA website, or a copy can be obtained by contacting Michael Griskavich at this email address. To successfully complete your investigation, you need to interact directly with railroad personnel. You should contact the train crew as soon as possible upon your arrival. The train crew likely has information vital to your investigation, including a first-hand account of the incident. The number of train crew members you may encounter at a railroad incident can vary. Typically, trains are operated by a locomotive engineer and a conductor, but sometimes include additional railroad personnel like brakemen, trainees, and supervisors. The conductor will normally be your initial point of contact at the scene. The conductor is in charge of train movement and supervising the train crew's work. Coordinate with the conductor regarding any movement of the train. For example, train cars may need to be uncoupled and separated to clear a crossing to allow emergency personnel better access to the scene. However, if the train initiated an emergency brake application, the conductor may need to inspect the entire length of the train to make sure it's safe to move. The conductor is also in charge of the train consist documentation and will have information about the location and contents of each car in the train. The locomotive engineer operates the train. He's trained by the employing railroad and receives certification as a locomotive engineer based on standards set by the Federal Railroad Administration. Railroad operating rules and federal regulations prohibit the engineer from moving the train without proper authority. During a rail incident, at least one person, usually the engineer, will remain in the locomotive cab to move the train if necessary and to use the locomotive's more powerful radio to relay information to the railroad dispatcher. Because the locomotive isn't a motor vehicle, the engineer and the conductor are not required by law to have a driver's license to operate the train. Federal regulations require the railroad company to provide a certification card for both the engineer and conductor. Additionally, while Federal Railroad Administration regulations preempt state and local toxicological testing of railroad employees after train crashes, the regulations do not intend to preempt provisions of state criminal law. In most states, the occurrence of a train-vehicle collision by itself is not sufficient cause to conduct toxicological testing. You need to remember that because trains are not motor vehicles, road and highway traffic law does not apply. Regarding passenger trains, generally the engineer is the only crew member in the cab of the locomotive. The locomotive engineer operates the train, but the conductor normally rides in a passenger car. Many times we forget that train crew members are also victims of the accident. When making contact, know that they may be suffering from injuries as well as the emotional stress of the incident. Imagine if you did not have the capacity to avoid colliding with a motor vehicle or a trespasser. The train crew cannot stop the train quickly, has no option to maneuver around a potential threat. Or, in some instances, may not be aware that an incident had occurred. Other railroad employees may arrive at the scene of a collision. The railroad needs to conduct their own independent investigation to determine the cause of an accident. For example, a track supervisor may inspect the track for damage. If the crossing is equipped with active warning devices, a signal maintainer may inspect and test the system. An operating supervisor, railroad police officer, or claim agent may also be dispatched to the scene. Some railroads have their own police departments. These commissioned police officers can act as a liaison between the public sector and the railroad. Their claim agent conducts a concurrent investigation of the collision on behalf of the railroad. While railroad personnel are generally experienced in dealing with crossing accidents and can provide valuable information and assistance, they shouldn't interfere with your investigation. The environment can also be a contributing factor to a grade crossing collision and includes vegetation, structures, topography, weather, crossing layout, lighting, road surface, road construction. In addition, the visibility and presence of regulatory and warning signs may be a factor in a grade crossing collision. There are two types of grade crossings: public and private. Public crossings are those at which the highway or roadway is under the jurisdiction of and maintained by a public authority such as a municipality, county, or state agency. Private crossings are those in which the roadway is privately owned, as might be found on a farm or within an industrial complex where the road is generally not intended for public use and is not maintained by a public road authority. The roadway owner, public or private, typically maintains the road approaching the crossing on either side of the tracks. Private crossings may be marked if required by statute, government regulations, or private contract. Railroads may also choose to mark private crossings with stop signs or other signs with information such as the railroad's emergency phone number. Advanced warning signs may be installed by the road authority in advance of the crossing to alert motorists of a grade crossing ahead. These signs should be located a sufficient distance from the crossing to allow motor vehicle operators time to react before reaching the crossing. When drivers see these signs, they must be prepared to stop if a train is approaching or occupying the crossing. When conducting a collision investigation, you should identify the train and lead locomotive. Interview the train crew and gather information. Interview the automobile driver and witnesses, if applicable and available. Appraise crossing signs and signals. Have the train crew operate the locomotive warning devices. Record the DOT crossing inventory number. Note visual obstructions. Note any suspicious circumstances. The FRA has an example checklist you can use and adapt for your investigative procedures. Obtain the name and title of each crew member, particularly the engineer and conductor. Record their on-duty time schedules. Obtain the locomotive engineer's certificate information and expiration date. The engineer is not required by law to have a driver's license while operating a train, but federal regulations do require the railroad company to provide a certification card for the engineer. For the train information, you'll need the lead locomotive unit number and the train ID or symbol assigned by the railroad. Note the unique number assigned to the cars at the crossing and the total number of cars in the train. Record the owner of the railroad tracks with their name and address. Additionally, you'll need to have a crew member operate the locomotive safety devices. Note whether the headlight, auxiliary lights, horn, and bell are in proper working order. Keep in mind that the severity of the collision may have damaged this equipment. Finally, you need to assess the crossing safety equipment. Indicate whether existing signage is present, such as crossbuck sign, multiple track sign, advanced warning sign, pavement markings, and if the active warning devices are functioning. If the crossing is equipped with active traffic control devices, are the gates lowered? Are the lights flashing? Is the bell ringing? Record the US DOT crossing inventory number. Note the crossing surface material as either rubber, asphalt, concrete, wood, or other material. And finally, record any visual obstructions the automobile driver may have encountered when approaching the crossing. Driver failure to adjust to roadway conditions can be a contributing factor to any incident. Defective vehicle equipment can affect a driver's ability to avoid a collision. Conditions inside the vehicle, such as fogged, tinted, or broken windows, or loud radios, may distract the driver. The vehicle should be thoroughly photographed at the scene and vehicle code violations should be noted. Keep in mind that the severity of the collision probably damaged this equipment. An officer may respond to a collision where a vehicle was parked on the tracks. These collisions may be the result of willful acts such as suicides, suicide attempts, or vandalism. However, people attempting suicide or vandalism will often take deliberate steps to conceal the intent. Certain facts may point to the collision as being staged. For example, the automobile's transmission selector is in park or neutral. The keys have been removed from the ignition switch. The engine has time to cool down. Discarded cigarette butts are found where the vehicle was stopped. Witnesses may volunteer information about the driver waiting to approach the grade crossing until the train appeared, or that the driver deliberately stopped or slowed down on the tracks ahead of the train. Other violations at rail grade crossings may include parking too close to the railroad tracks, driving left of the center line on a grade crossing, failing to stop when required, such as school buses or hazardous material carriers. Commercial driver license holders have additional requirements and are subject to disqualification for specific grade crossing violations, such as failing to slow down to check for approaching trains, for drivers who are not always required to stop, for drivers who are not always required to stop, failing to stop before reaching the crossing if the tracks are not clear, for drivers who are always required to stop, failing to stop before driving onto the crossing, for failing to have sufficient space to drive completely through the crossing without stopping, following too closely to the vehicle in front, for failing to obey a traffic control device or directions of an enforcement official at the crossing, for failing to negotiate a crossing because of insufficient crossing clearance.
When we arrive on the scene, we make sure that the scene is safe. We begin our reconstruction of the event. It begins obviously with taking photographs of all the scene evidence, and we do a forensic mapping of the scene, and that is using an electronic theodolite similar to what land surveyors would use, and it involves a electronic measuring station and a prism pole, and we will walk through the evidence and collect three-dimensional points, which are later turned into a scale diagram with a computer program. We would work closely with the Railroad Association or whoever's in charge to collect any information that's available from the crossing. The train itself has an event data recorder, and most often the signal system has some type of electronic monitoring system, which can be very helpful in investigating the crash and determining the sequence of events and whether all systems were working properly or not.
There are proactive and preventive actions that you can take that can greatly reduce the number of incidents and potentially prevent tragedies. One approach is to know the tracks and railways in your jurisdiction, especially the grade crossings, advanced warning signs, and active traffic control devices in your area that alert drivers to approaching trains. Too often, motor vehicle operators are unfamiliar with or do not consider traffic laws pertaining to grade crossings. This lack of consideration or understanding can result in catastrophic incidents that may impact an entire community. Your presence near a railroad grade crossing can positively influence a motorist's driving habits. Position your cruiser in a conspicuous manner near the grade crossing and monitor the crossing for compliance with the law. Motorists will be less likely to violate the law or put themselves and their passengers in harm's way if an officer is present and monitoring driver behavior. Use the opportunity to educate drivers and, if necessary, reinforce your message by issuing citations for infractions. Trespassers on railroad property also present an avoidable danger. Not only is trespassing a violation of the law, but trespassers often do not realize they're putting their own lives at risk. Every year, hundreds of people die while trespassing. Trespasser fatalities are rising and now exceed the number of deaths from train vehicle collisions. Risky behaviors, such as biking or running adjacent to the track, often result in a tragic ending when the person doesn't hear approaching trains. When there are multiple tracks, sound may be distorted and may obscure other approaching trains. Some people try to climb on rail equipment, cross through a train between rail cars, or attempt to jump on a train and are knocked off or fall off when the train moves abruptly. Trespassers may commit malicious acts intended to harm others. Tampering with signals or tracks, breaking locks on track switches, or placing debris on rails has caused disastrous wrecks. Be suspicious of persons hanging around railroads in the community. Take steps to determine their intent. Remember, when you are on railroad property for any reason, always notify the railroad and be aware that trains operate at any time, in any direction, and on any track. Damaging, removing, or stealing railroad equipment, including signals and signs, could result in a failure of the train control system. This failure could result in a head-on collision and/or a misrouted train, not to mention other unforeseen catastrophes. Acts of vandalism to railroad property affect the health, safety, and welfare of the traveling public, the neighboring community, and railroad employees. Defacing railroad property such as tagging rail equipment, defacing markings on freight cars, removal of placards or other signs is also very common. These types of activities present a danger to the community by obstructing the display of critical information needed to safely transport freight. An example would be removal of hazardous material placards needed for identification of a car's contents by emergency responders. The reckless act of throwing or dropping objects from bridges, suspending concrete blocks from ropes, and shooting or throwing objects at trains can cause serious injury or even death to both vandals and railroad employees. Grade crossing signal vandalism or theft can have a significant impact on the community. If signal components are damaged or stolen, the system may not provide the prescribed warning to approaching motorists. When a train crew is informed of a traffic control device failure at a crossing, train movements and speeds are restricted. This causes delays in the delivery of goods and, due to blocked crossings, causes disruption of community traffic patterns. Emergency response vehicles may also be blocked or delayed. Railroad trespassing incidents can have devastating lifelong effects not only on the individual and railroad personnel, but the community as well. Most railroads encourage and support law enforcement officers in their effort to apprehend and prosecute trespassers. Railroad authorities can provide invaluable assistance with investigations, prosecutions, trespasser abatement programs, and installing additional signage. Some individuals may seek to deliberately cause catastrophic incidents. Worldwide events have shown that high-profile targets such as railroads are common scenes for acts of terrorism. Damage to critical infrastructure by causing a hazardous materials release create an opportunity for a significant disruption of our economy. Pre-planning is another important part of managing and responding to railroad emergencies. Does your department have an established protocol or standard operating procedures for railroad emergencies? Do you know how to find railroad contact information? If you answered no to either of these questions, now is the time to start pre-planning. An understanding of basic railroad operations, policies, and procedures is helpful in planning an emergency response on railroad property. Make sure your department has developed a Railroad Emergency Response Plan, ERP, that can be amended to your local or regional General Emergency Response Plan. At a minimum, the ERP should address railroad maps, locations of highway rail grade crossings, rail tunnels and bridges that may impede your access to railroad property, locations of vulnerable facilities such as schools, hospitals, watersheds and water supply points, power facilities, or other infrastructure locations, public activity areas with close proximity to railroad tracks, contact numbers for track owners and railroad emergency communications facilities, contact numbers for dispatch centers, a description of commonly carried lading, especially hazardous materials, a list of local industrial customers serviced by the railroads. By becoming familiar with the railroads in your purview, you can then develop an incident emergency response plan. Check with your EMA, dispatch, and firefighter personnel to coordinate response plan efforts. Take note of any grade crossings and places of high rail volume. Develop a map of the area you patrol that has the railways marked on it. And more importantly, make a list of all the railroad emergency contact numbers. Utilize these resources to help you better prepare to respond to a rail-related incident. You may also contact the railroads to utilize their own personalized training materials. There are a number of helpful resources and agencies to enhance your investigative skills. The Federal Railroad Administration is an administration in the United States Department of Transportation whose primary purpose is to promulgate and enforce rail safety regulations, administer railroad assistance programs, conduct research and development in support of improved railroad safety and national rail transportation policy, and consolidate government support of rail transportation activities nationwide. The FRA website provides a good starting point for research and information. Additionally, the FRA website provides information on identifying the railroad's operating areas and locations of all crossings by milepost. The FRA can also assist you in your investigations. You can visit the FRA website for more details. Operation Lifesaver is another online source for rail safety education. Operation Lifesaver's mission is to end collisions, deaths, and injuries at highway rail grade crossings and on railroad property through a nationwide network of volunteers who work to educate people about rail safety. They provide training videos, online education resources, as well as public awareness materials. All Class I railroads can provide valuable information that is useful in responding to a railroad emergency. Check railroad company websites for information about the railroad operations in your area of responsibility and for point of contact information.
This video provided you with the necessary information to assist you when responding to a collision involving a vehicle or pedestrian with a train and other rail equipment. Let's recap some of the main points. Make sure the railroad is aware of your presence on their property. Expect movement of trains, engines, cars, and other rail equipment at any time, on any track, and from either direction. Know your access routes. Identify the precise location of impact or derailment and note the final resting location. Identify hazardous and environmental risks. Make contact with and interview the train crew. The crew will be instrumental in the response efforts. And finally, your agency should have a policy or protocol to handle railroad incidents. If not, now is the time to put one together. Contact the railroads in your area to begin the conversation. Always follow protocol and prepare yourself for a call involving railroads. Thank you for watching this video, and remember to always be safe around railroad tracks.
This video is part 2 in an informational series for law enforcement personnel. Part 1 of this series, titled Rail Safety for Law Enforcement, covers railroad basics and provides a more in-depth coverage of railroad safety. Additional informational videos of interest can be found on the FRA website, or a copy can be obtained by contacting Michael Griskevich at this email address.